Welcome to Sustainability in the NDIS, Webinar 6. Community Business Bureau acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Australia. We recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to them and their cultures and to elders past, present and emerging. Thank you for joining us for the 6th webinar in our NDIS Success Series. My name is Dimitri Matsiliadis, and on behalf of the Business Consulting team, I would like to welcome you to this webinar on sustainability in the NDIS. Financial sustainability remains one of the biggest challenges for NDIS providers. While the operating conditions have improved, 76% of organisations among 381 surveyed NDIS providers were concerned that they will not be able to provide NDIS services at current prices. It is vitally important that you are able to understand and analyse your potential revenue and associated costs to understand if your services will be viable into the future. To reiterate, financial viability is critical for long-term sustainability in the NDIS. In this webinar of our series, we will explain the importance of understanding and analysing your potential revenue and associated costs of providing your NDIS services. If you have watched the previous webinars, if you have not watched the previous webinar, we strongly encourage you to. In the first webinar, we provided insights into the fundamentals of the NDIS to help you understand what it means to provide services under the NDIS. In our second webinar, we discussed the importance of understanding the market you want to operate in. Who are your potential customers? What do they need and want from their NDIS provider? And who else is already providing NDIS services in your area? In the third webinar, we spoke about how to design an NDIS service for people with disability and how to plan for the service provision. In the fourth webinar, we discussed NDIS compliance requirements for registered and unregistered providers, including the NDIS Code of Conduct. We spoke about the importance to plan and manage and monitor quality, risk and compliance. In the fifth webinar, we discussed how the overall strategy will lead to your marketing strategy and how you can attract clients and how to improve your customer experience. In today's webinar, we will cover revenue, setup costs, costs in the NDIS environment, operating costs, covering costs, cash flow, targets, recording and reporting, business plans. Each of the items covered in this webinar form the components of a financially sustainable organisation. With an increased understanding and appreciation for each of these items, you will be better placed in understanding, analysing and reviewing the financial sustainability of your organisation. Revenue. Your NDIS services. In webinar 3, we covered designing the NDIS service that you will provide. This uncovers who your customers are and what services you will provide. With an understanding of the services that you are looking to provide, a more granular review of the NDIS price guide and support catalogue can be had. To recap, the NDIS price guide sets the terms and conditions for the NDIS service provision, such as cancellation rules and which activities the provider can charge for or not. The NDIS support catalogue is the NDIS price list. It sets the price limits for support categories such as personal care, community access, domestic assistance, and professional services. Most prices are listed based on an hourly service provision. As a provider, you need to understand and apply these rules. You are also obliged to comply with the Australian Consumer Law and the Competition and Consumer Act. The majority of NDIS providers can only charge prices for their services that are within the price guide. This means that the maximum price you can charge is set by the NDIA and not something that you can charge. For example, you cannot increase your prices to cover additional costs or slow demand. We note that if participants self-manage their NDIS plans, you can charge higher than the price guide. For this reason, it is vitally important that the NDIS price guide and support catalogue are understood, and you are across all updates as they occur. It is important that you really need to know what you can charge for example, if you can charge for travel or non-face-to-face time required for things such as writing up notes outside of the direct service provision. The price guide changes regularly, and you will need to be abreast of any changes as they occur. A number of the providers that we have worked with have not been charging for all of the activities that they are entitled to charge for. It is important to your financial sustainability that you are aware of everything you can charge for, and if you decide not to charge for a particular activity, that this is a conscious choice and that you are aware of the financial consequences for your organisation. The NDIS price guide sets the terms and conditions for the NDIS service provision, such as cancellation rules, and which activities the provider can charge for or not. The NDIS support catalogue is the NDIS price list, not only sets the price limits for support categories, but also clarifies what can and cannot be claimed. It is important to be aware of which activities you cannot charge for two reasons. One, to ensure that you are compliant with the NDIS service provision, and two, to allow you to factor in additional costs that are required to provide the service but unable to be charged for. We note that the NDIS service and support offered will impact what can and cannot be charged for. Costs that are required to provide the service but unable to be charged for may include administrative tasks such as staff scheduling and invoicing. Furthermore, we note that a key factor in the financial sustainability of your NDIS service is appropriately invoicing for services that are allowed under the NDIS price guide. What drives revenue? With an understanding of how revenue is generated, you can take it one step further and ask yourself, what are the drivers of your revenue? For most organisations, the two biggest drivers will be quantity and price. Price, as stated earlier, can be largely driven by the NDIA. Quantity. The person with the NDIS plan is the purchaser of services. The person can choose their provider and, depending on the total funding, can purchase as many services as needed. For this reason, the number of services you provide will be driven by the number of participants that choose you to provide the services that they need and are eligible for, which can in turn be driven by existing clients spending more with you, new clients using your services, and new products and services being purchased. This understanding lets you recognise that if price cannot be controlled, the only way to increase revenue is by increasing the number of products and/or services provided. In a market-driven environment, this is done by being the provider of choice for more participants. Setup costs. Before a single dollar can be earned and you can provide your services, what do you need? What do you need to be able to provide your service and generate the revenue you are planning to earn? To be able to provide the product and your service, do you need a facility to run your service, vehicles to travel to clients and/or transport your clients, equipment, insurance, registration, staff, and if so, how will you recruit? Will there be costs involved in recruitment? Everything you need to earn your first dollar will form your setup costs. Some of these setup costs will be one-off costs and only required at the beginning of your operation, such as the bond for your office space. Some of the setup costs will be ongoing yearly fixed costs, such as office rent and insurance. Some costs will be both setup costs and ongoing costs. For example, office space, setup costs of a bond and rent in advance, ongoing costs of ongoing rent, staffing in terms of setup cost, recruitment, training, ongoing cost of wages, superannuation, recruitment for staff turnover and new training, computer and phone, setup costs of initial computer and phone equipment, ongoing costs of support, licensing and call costs, vehicle, setup costs of purchase of vehicles if applicable, ongoing costs of finance, leasing costs if applicable, and running costs and maintenance. NDIS audits, setup costs of initial registration audit, the ongoing costs required every 18 months or every 3 years, and IT systems, setup costs of client relationship management software and accounting software, and the ongoing costs of licensing. Costs in the NDIS environment. It is important to recognise the environment in which you operate or plan to operate in and the associated costs. You will often operate in multiple environments, each with their own associated costs. Broadly speaking, NDIS providers operate in 4 environments: the Australian environment, the NDIS environment, a competitive environment, and a controlled environment. It may sound obvious, but the NDIS operates in Australia, and as a provider operating a business in Australia, you will need to comply with Australian legislation. As an Australian business, you will need to comply with Australian Consumer Law, the Competition and Consumer Act, and Australia's employment laws, including the Fair Work Act. If you are an Australian not-for-profit, you will also need to comply with the AC&C requirements. Minimum entitlements, including minimum wages, exist for employees in Australia, and employers need to be aware of the conditions outlined in the Fair Work Act, namely the National Employment Standards, or the NES, relevant awards, enterprise agreements, and employment contracts. The national minimum wage and the NES make up the minimum entitlements for employees in Australia. An award, employment contract, enterprise agreement, or other registered agreement can't provide for conditions that are less than the national minimum wage or the NES. They can't exclude the NES. Awards. The type of work conducted by an employee will determine the award that is applicable to them. Employment contract. The type of employment in which an employee is employed will impact their minimum entitlements. For example, casual employees are required to be paid a casual loading. As an NDIS provider, there are a number of costs that are required to operate within the NDIS environment. Registered and unregistered providers need to comply with the NDIS Code of Conduct. Registered providers need to comply with the NDIS practice standards and quality and safeguarding rules. Ensure that you have an in-house complaints management and resolution system, an in-house incident management system, and notify the NDIS of reportable incidents. Workers need to be screened through the National Workers Screening Process. Currently, state and territory screening applies. Meet behaviour support requirements, if applicable, and ensure workers receive the appropriate training. NDIS audits. As a registered provider, you need to have audits with an approved quality auditor. Competitive environment. Individuals get funding in their NDIS plan and they have the choice and control on spending these funds. People with an NDIS plan can decide over their services what should be delivered, how much, when, and by whom. Currently, there are over 14,000 registered NDIS providers. In a competitive environment, you will need to bring on new clients and retain existing clients. As outlined in previous webinars, marketing will be crucial for some providers in bringing on new clients. To retain existing clients in a competitive environment, providers will have extra pressure to provide a good service. Efficient systems and processes that facilitate good customer service, such as CRM systems, will aid in providing a good customer experience. As outlined, NDIS providers operate in a controlled environment in relation to the level of revenue that can be charged and the level of expenditure required, such as minimum wages and governance costs such as audits. In a controlled environment that limits the revenue you can earn and requires certain levels of expenditure, there is an added importance on efficiency. Operating costs. Following your setup costs, broadly speaking, there are three types of ongoing costs: direct costs, indirect costs, and future costs. Direct costs are all of the costs directly related to providing the specific product or service in question. The most obvious direct cost is the hourly rate of an employee to provide an hour of service to a NDIS participant. Please note that not all direct costs related to providing the specific service will able to be claimed. For example, your time spent scheduling staff to provide the service is not able to be invoiced for. When considering the direct costs, there may be direct costs that are not front of mind. For example, the hourly rate of an employee may also include superannuation, work cover levy, transport costs, supervisor wage costs, training, and work hours which are unable to be invoiced or unbillable hours. Indirect costs are the costs required to assist in providing the specific product or service in question, but are not directly related to the specific product or service. Examples of indirect costs include marketing, NDIS governance requirements such as audits, and head office rent. Indirect costs also include costs that are closely related to specific services but are not directly related to the service being provided. Examples include training for support workers, unbilled time for direct workers such as breaks, and supervisor wages and on costs. With prices and some aspects of costs controlled, NDIS providers are limited in the number of levers that can be pulled to improve financial sustainability of their service. So operating efficiently is critical to financial sustainability and profitability. Some of the areas we've seen providers address include utilisation. Are you maximising the billable hours for your direct service workforce? NDIS support worker model assumes a 92% utilisation. Processes and system efficiencies can reduce frontline costs by increasing the amount of time workers are available for billable work and reduce back office costs, for example, in maintaining client records and managing invoicing. Enabling frontline workers to access systems such as your CRM and rostering systems while they are working in the community reduces lost time travelling to the office back and forth and may ultimately reduce your office costs. Make sure work is being done at the appropriate level. For a larger service, it may be more appropriate to employ a lower cost rostering officer than to have a manager responsible for rostering. Future costs are costs that may not be required today, such as wages and rent, but are likely to be required in the future. Examples of future costs could include IT system upgrades, internal process improvements, and equipment. Plan ahead for ongoing service development, improvements in efficiencies. Cost these plans into your medium to longer term budgeting, and then build the financial requirements into your target profits. Covering costs. All costs need to be covered by the revenue that you are able to charge. This includes direct costs, indirect costs, and future costs. Although it may be relatively simple to determine and cover your direct costs, careful consideration must be given to your ability to determine an appropriate level of indirect and future costs and cover all indirect and future costs with the revenue that you generate. Please note that your ability to generate certain levels of surpluses will differ between different services, noting that some services are more lucrative than others. Surpluses can provide necessary funds for future costs, such as investments and organisational improvements and/or cross-subsidised services that generate lower surpluses. Cash flow. In a perfect world, you will be instantaneously paid upon providing a service. For some, this may occur. However, you may not be paid for services provided for weeks or months after providing a service. The cash flow gap occurs largely due to three reasons. 1, the services are provided before you invoice. 2, invoices are not created immediately after providing the service. And 3, once an invoice is issued, you are not paid immediately. Service first, payment later. The NDIS pays for the service after the service is delivered. The prepayment of services is not permitted. Invoice after service. For agency managed participants who claim directly from the My Place portal. For plan or self-managed participants, the provider generates an invoice for the appropriate party. Complicated invoicing procedures and requirements can delay the invoicing procedure. Awaiting payment. Providers are reliant on third parties to pay their invoices in a timely manner. Some parties will pay invoices in a more timely manner than others, and this can be anything from 3 days to a month or more. Claims on the NDIS portal are generally paid by NDIS within 3 days. However, there can be delays due to various reasons. Good plan managers pay within 3 days. However, there are plan managers who can take up to a month to pay. This chart shows payment being received 45 days after the service was provided. Your ability to invoice quickly after a service allows you to get paid sooner. How quickly you are paid after issuing an invoice is likely the most significant factor in being paid for your services in a timely manner. NDIA managed or agency managed, the provider claims the funding directly from the NDIA. Plan managed, the plan manager pays the provider on behalf of the participant. Self-managed, the participant pays the provider directly and claims the money from the NDIA. Each way that an NDIS plan is managed will impact how you invoice. For example, for an agency managed participant, you may need to lodge an invoice through the My Place portal, either individually or as a bulk upload. Some providers claim daily to secure their cash flow. However, this increases the administrative burden. Others claim weekly, fortnightly, or monthly. How quickly you are paid. For example, some plan managers may pay invoices sooner rather than later. You will need to fund this cash flow gap, as you are very likely to continue incurring expenses while you are waiting to be paid. How will you fund the cash flow gap? Through savings, through previous earnings? Additionally, how can you reduce the cash flow gap? Can you improve your invoicing procedures? Targets. Targets allow us to measure our actual results against our expected or projected results. Targets allow the tracking of goals and objectives to be quantified and measured. Targets can be set for any time period, weekly, monthly, or annual. As previously stated, an NDIS provider operates in a competitive, controlled environment, and as such, there are a number of targets that should be set. Examples include revenue and revenue targets, revenue growth targets if starting out or expanding your services, wages as a percentage of revenue, direct worker utilisation, being billable divided by unbillable hours, profit as a percentage of revenue, amount of profit to support future costs and or build cash reserves, debtor days, how quickly you get paid for services provided, and your cash position. You may want to develop additional targets that are specific to your service or to the context you are operating in. Record and review. If you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Recording and measuring the right data as early as possible will significantly improve your ability to review and analyse the sustainability of your operations. With the right system, in particular a modern accounting system, you will be able to compare revenue from different services, analyse how quickly you are being paid, determine profitability, and review cash flow. Actual results for each area should be compared to their respective targets on a regular basis for the following: revenue target, revenue growth target, wages as a percentage of revenue, direct worker utilisation, profit as a percentage of revenue, amount of profit to support future costs and or build cash reserves, debtor days, how quickly you get paid for services provided, and your cash position. Results and efforts that are not directly recorded on financial statements should also be recorded and reviewed on a regular basis. Examples can include number of leads generated, number of new clients, direct worker utilisation, if not already included in your financial reporting, staff turnover, customer turnover, net promoter score, adherence to requirements such as successful completion of internal and external audits, complaints and incident registers. In providing an NDIS service, there are some key performance indicators to record and review regularly. Examples include direct worker wages plus super as a percentage of revenue, all staff costs including supervisor costs as a percentage of revenue, direct worker utilisation, hours invoiced as a percentage of all hours worked, number of new clients each week, month, year, to measure marketing efforts. After watching today's webinar and completing the exercises in the activity worksheet, you will be able to understand the financial workings of your services. You will have gained an understanding of how to generate revenue. Having a good concept of your service design will help you to analyse the costs in setting up or expanding that service. Developing a financial forecast will help you to understand if your service is financially viable or by when it will be viable. We are now at the end of our 6-part NDIS Success Program, and we encourage you to spend the time to fill out the NDIS Success Roadmap business plan. You will find the template on our website. Completing all sections will help you to answer essential questions and a plan for NDIS success service delivery. In Section A, we ask you to review how your future service will fit into your organisation's mission and vision and your overall strategic objectives. If your organisation has not got any mission and visions yet, it is important to identify these first. In Section B, we combine the learnings from Webinar 1 and Webinar 2, Success in the NDIS and Understanding the Market. We strongly recommend that you spend the time and effort to investigate potential market demand and the need for your service offering. Please test your idea from different perspectives and review if your service will be built on your organisation's strengths. Section C helps you to design your service and to review how the service will fit into the NDIS price guide. You will assess and identify your unique value proposition and what makes your service or product attractive to NDIS participants. Section D will help you to identify the required resources for successful service delivery. Section E is an extremely important section as it will help you to identify the compliance requirements and how you will manage and monitor quality and risk. Maybe you identify that due to the cost of the audit, you would like to start small by only offering services to plan or self-managed participants. Or you are willing and determined to go the extra mile and become a registered provider. Your organisation might already be registered for some services. However, you may identify that you are missing the necessary registration group for the potential new service. We have included a list of all NDIS registration groups and compliance requirements in the Webinar 4 resources. Completing Section F will help you to establish a marketing strategy. How will you attract sufficient customers? And how will you ensure that they have a positive experience with your services and will be your best marketers? The last section, G, will help you to assess and identify if your service will be financially viable into the future. We wish you all the best in completing the NDIS Success Roadmap and wish you all the very best for your NDIS journey. We still have one more Q&A session that will go live on the 13th of October. Please email us any questions that have come up while watching today's webinar or any other previous webinars. You can also post your questions in the Facebook group. Please consider applying for the free one-to-one support from one of our business consultants to help you kick off your NDIS service. 8 organisations nationwide will work with consultants to develop your NDIS idea from business plan to the pilot stage. Our consultants will work with you to develop an action plan to get your idea off the ground, to help you progress your idea to pilot stage, and provide direct support in key areas where they would add most value. Apply online. Applications are still open until the 30th of October. Thanks for watching Sustainability in the NDIS. Bye for now.